today I'll show you how to set up monitoring and observability in your multi-cluster infrastructure. For example, if you have more than one Kubernetes cluster, you need a centralized place where you can collect all logs, all metrics to one place to operate them properly. In today's video, we will use Grafana, Mimir, Loki, Promtail, Prometheus, and GitLab CI to deploy all these monitoring tools to our clusters. And for educational purposes, I will create 2 Kubernetes clusters. I will use Grafana Mimir. It is a very useful tool to store all your metrics that are collected by Prometheus in one place, so you can build Grafana Mimir only in one zone or spread it horizontally to different zones. There are built-in features for this. It is a very flexible tool, so you can use it for educational purposes or for production-ready environment. So you can create custom recording rules, you can create custom queries, and a lot of stuff. Also, I want to describe how Mimir works, about architecture of this tool, but I don't have enough time in this video to describe all the information, so you can easily dive in docs and read it by yourself as for another tools. Second tool is Grafana Loki. Grafana Loki is like Mimir, but for logs, not for metrics. Grafana Loki is like centralized store for your Promtail logs. For example, you have a lot of clusters, a lot of nodes. On each node there are Promtail deployed in daemon set. So Promtail collect logs from your pods and send it to the Grafana Loki. So also you can store all these logs in S3 object storage, as we can do it in Mimir, but also you can use a persistence like drive, like PVC in your Kubernetes cluster. As a third tool, I will use Promtail. As I said before, this tool collects logs from pods and set it to Grafana Loki. Of course, we will use Prometheus for scraping metrics from our services, from Kubernetes, from pods, and send it to Grafana Mimir as centralized storage. And we will use Grafana for visualization of our data, for building dashboards and other stuff. So I created a simple diagram to explain how it will work. For example, we will have a centralized Kubernetes cluster where we will deploy Grafana, Loki, and Mimir as centralized standalone cluster for collecting and storing logs and metrics and visualize them. And also we have another clusters where we will deploy Prometheus and Promtail will send logs to central cluster to the Loki, and Prometheus will send metrics also to central cluster to Mimir. Let's move to the Helm values. For deploying, I will use Helm because it is a very useful tool. You can manage all your configs very easily and save them for next installations. For example, for Grafana, there is a default dashboard settings that are necessary for creating dashboards out of the box. For example, you have 2 options. You deployed Grafana with default Helm values, add some dashboards, add some configs, some data sources. After your cluster destroyed or something else was happened and you lose all your data that you are configured in your Grafana instance. So if you want to prevent this situation, you need to describe all the settings that you need in your Helm values file. For example, I don't want to waste my dashboards after something happened with my Grafana instance, so I put it in the values file. So out of the box, Grafana chart doesn't support custom dashboards. You can't just add your dashboards to the Helm values because these dashboards need to be stored in the chart necessary. So as usually, you just specify Helm chart what you want to install and specify your own override values. But if you specify a public Grafana chart and specify your custom Helm values with these dashboards, they will not appear in your Grafana instance. So you need to clone official Grafana chart to your local storage and add dashboards manually to this chart, like to the root to dashboards folder. That's only thing that we need to modify in existing Grafana chart that are developed by Grafana team. So here I initialize my dashboards that I already put in dashboards folder, and also I specify ingress rules to access my Grafana instance. I defined data sources. As I said before, we will have two data sources, it is Mimir and Loki. So you can attach these data sources by URL, but I specified external URL. There is not a very good practice, so you can define here a local DNS name of Loki in your cluster. So for example, it will be Loki and that's it maybe, I do not remember. And same settings for Mimir. Helm values for Loki, I decided to use deployment mode single binary, so you can move to the Loki artifact hub, find this chart and see default values. As we can see here, we have different deployment mode. So for example, single binary, Loki is deployed as a single binary useful for small install, typically without high availability, up to a few tens of gigabytes per day. So for educational purposes, I decided to use this deployment mode, but in your environment, I think you should use simple, scalable or distributed deployment mode of Loki. Also, I set up ingress here to send logs from other clusters to this Loki instance, as I said before. So for example, if you have separated Kubernetes cluster, you need a tunnel for sending logs to central cluster. You can do it by external domain, but if your Kubernetes cluster are in the same subnet, you can set up internal DNS resolver for all your network. You will use internal DNS names for all the services. Like for example, if you have your own private network, you can deploy Bint9 and set up DNS resolving and use your own DNS names and your own SSL certificates. So these services will not be open to the internet. That's a correct way how to set up it. But not often you will have your own private network that you can administrate or something. In this case, you need to set up external domain for Loki, but also you need to turn on authentication for your requests from Promtail. So for example, because it's necessary for secure purpose, here we have authentication parameters. You can use gateway instead simple ingress, and here you can turn on basic authentication, like just turn enable to true, set username and password, and there will not be a problem for you. But also you can get it by ingress annotations using Nginx ingress Kubernetes auth type basic and provide secret where these credentials are stored. So your logs from your Promtail will go to the Loki in secure way, and nobody will have permissions to push logs to your Loki instance. So, and I decided to use persistence for storing my logs. I will not use S3 bucket. You can set up it here. As you can see, storage, S3, and define all these values. There is a Mimir. I will use S3 bucket storage. Also, I created ingress. Also, you need to create here basic authentication. So, for example, we will check Nginx basic authentication. You should to turn it on because there is the same situation as with Grafana Loki. Your instance will be open to the internet and you need to secure your gateway for metrics. But as I said before, you have private network, so you can create your own DNS records and do not open your Mimir and Loki instances to the external network. I don't want to deploy Minio in my cluster. I will use external S3 bucket storage. My advice to use external S3 bucket from Amazon or something else. Do not deploy Minio in your setup. So there is zone aware replication. I turned it off because it is enabled by default, because I will not have multi-zone in my cluster setup. So, and here you can define zones which will be selected for deploying Mimir. So for example, if you have 3 replicas of ingest, it will be deployed in different zones. for high availability. For example, zone A, zone B, zone C, but you should to rename it by yourself. It depends on your cloud provider and zones. So as we can see, name of the zone used in labels and selectors. When you create managed Kubernetes clusters in your cloud provider, there will be labels on nodes that will describe in which zone these nodes are located. After that, we will move to Prometheus. Here I disable default rules because I built all these rules by myself. Also, I turned off Grafana, Alert Manager, and only Prometheus are enabled because I'm not using official Prometheus chart for this deployment. I use kube-prometheus stack. So I use this chart for this deployment, and this chart includes Grafana, Alert Manager, and other stuff, but I need only Prometheus, and I'm very familiar with this chart, so I decided to use it. So here I just enabled Prometheus and specify external labels for metrics that are collected from cluster. And also I defined additional remote write. As I said before, it is necessary to push metrics to Mimir. We have Promtail values. This is a necessary field because it's responsible for pushing our logs from Promtail to Loki. As I said before, I do it by external network. If you enabled basic notification here in Loki, you can also configure it here. You can do it using this config. Just do it like this, and there will not be a problem for you. So, and GitLab CI. So I already set up 2 Kubernetes clusters for this video where we'll deploy these monitoring tools. First of all, we need to create service accounts for our GitLab CI that is necessary for fresh installed clusters. So let's create a service account called pipeline and create cluster role binding for our service account with cluster admin role in default namespace. So that's it. And also we should to create secret for our service account manually from 1.24 version of Kubernetes. So let's define namespace. That's it. Let's check it. Service account. There is a pipeline. Let's see. Yeah, we have certificate and token for our account for next usage. So we need to obtain certificate and token for next usage. So let's do it by I'll edit this YAML file. Just copy this certificate, decode it with the base default, remember, and also this token. So let's move to CI. Here I already set up repository, variables, get variable. For example, it will be a development cluster. Get this value. So that's it. Nice. Let's make the same for a second cluster. So create service account, create cluster role binding, and token for this account manually. So let's check it. This account, yeah, fine. Create. Yeah, that's it. So let's get the certificate, code it. That's it. And let's call this cluster like infrastructure, like centralized cluster, where we will deploy all our observability tools, like make it file. Okay, nice. Protect it. Yeah, fine. So let's install ingress controller. For our cluster, I will use default and ingress and Nginx. So as we can see, pods are deploying now. So, that's it. And we need to install certificate manager to create SSL certificates by Let's Encrypt for our domains that we will use. And we need to create cluster issuer. That's it. And apply cluster issuer. That's it. Let's check it. This class Nginx. Okay. See. Yeah. So fine. We just configured our 2 Kubernetes clusters for accepting connection from external network, for setting up our domains and setting up SSL certificates with Let's Encrypt. So okay, now we can move to GitLab CI configuration. and set up our CI/CD pipeline for deploying our services. Maybe there will be different bugs, different problems, so I'll show you how to fix them because I didn't test this config yet, and I forgot that we will deploy our monitoring and observability tools in the first cluster, so I need to point my domain records to this external IP address that are created by ingress controller. So I already did it in my DNS provider. So here we have GitLab CI, I'm already developed it. So here we have jobs for connecting to our clusters. I have only 2 clusters, so this way to connecting to clusters is fine in my case, but if you have more than 2 clusters, maybe 5 or 10 or 100 clusters, you need to do it by Argo CD, maybe with different generators, because it's not a very good idea to manually define each job for each cluster. So as we can see here, maybe later I will create a video how to install, how to deploy this configuration to our clusters using Argo CD and using application set with generators, so you don't need to define each cluster in your GitLab CI. It will be handled by Argo CD, so it will be fully automated and no reason to do it by this way. But in my case, I have only 2 clusters, so there is not a problem to define it here. But that's only for example. You can modify it based on your situation. So here we are deploying our Mimir to our infra cluster, where will be all observability tools are deployed. So we just add Grafana repository and install Mimir. Also, I set here values for my S3 bucket because I don't like to store this data in Git repository, so you need to define your secrets through CI/CD variables and pass it to Helm using set. So here we deploy Loki to our infra cluster. I use default Grafana Loki chart, so specified version because it is a good practice. Maybe in the future there will be a major update of this chart and my values will not work, so you need to specify version every time when you deploy something using Helm. It is very important. So, and also I set here external labels like cluster name infra. These external labels will append to another label, so I can filter logs based on the cluster, and it is very useful. So we can see these values here. So I just override it with these values. So here job for deploying Loki in our infra cluster. So you need to specify in all your jobs when you install some charts in your cluster, always specify a version. You need to strictly specify a version what you want to install. It's a safe way to install charts in your cluster. That's a Promtail deployment job for each cluster for development and infra cluster. Here I set values for external labels. There was a problem. For example, you have a lot of clusters and Promtail sent logs from each cluster to centralized Loki. You need an option to define from which cluster this log came. So you need to define external labels for each Promtail, like I made it here, like cluster name development and cluster name infrastructure. So I override these values with Helm set. Here we can see this parameter. So after that we install Grafana for visualization. So there is a job for deployment of Prometheus in our clusters. Also here I override external labels with Helm set. So we can see this value here, because also you need an option to define from which cluster metrics was scraped. So that's it. Let's configure our CI/CD variables. for this pipeline, like I need to set up Kubernetes config dev and Kubernetes config infra. I already set up certificates for these clusters, and now I need to set up Kubernetes config. So let's go to our GitLab CI and set variables. I already set up Kubernetes config for my clusters. So let's copy it, like that's for infra cluster. Paste it here. Infra file, and that's it. And Kubernetes config dev and Kubernetes config dev. Save. And now I set up connection to my clusters for pipeline in GitLab CI. So let's push some changes and let's see what will. Oh no, I forgot about variables for my S3 bucket, so that's my fault. So I added necessary values for my pipeline. Yeah, that's it. So let's push some changes and see what will happen. Okay, so what's going on? So there is a problem about my kubeconfig. So there is a problem with my kubeconfig, so I decided to put certificate in base 64 directly to Kubernetes config, not copying it. So let's save it and give another try. So there is a problem that Helm can't parse data for set command, unable to parse key interpretation. I think that's a problem with maybe. Yeah, that's it. Just my mistake. Remove it. Config common storage 3, yeah, that's it. As we can see, there are no errors right now in our pipeline when installing Mimir. So process is running. See any problem? No, so that's fine. Let's wait until Helm finish installation. Also, I forgot to add annotations for cluster issuer, so there will be a problem that we will not have SSL certificates. So I need to paste annotations for ingress here, here, and here, and redeploy all this. Because as you can see, ingress deployed correctly, but certificate are not set up properly. Check it and nothing. Okay, but as we can see, Mimir successfully deployed, so I need to push changes with cluster issuer annotation. And as you can see, there is a problem with what? With Loki. There's a problem based on there is a common storage config. Okay, as we can see, certificate for our ingress are created. Successfully created certificate. So we can here. Yeah, there is a cert, so that's fine. Hot Loki failed. Maybe there is a problem with my values and issue on GitHub about Loki Helm chart, and here we can see so as we can see here in default values, there is no description about single binary mode, what you need to do for this, and another stuff. Very bad explanation. You can see here docs that describe this issue, like, so you need to configure the file system storage by this way and set read backend write replicas to 0 because it is free by default. So there is a problem. It's not clearly explained in default values. So I don't want to use S3 object storage for Loki, so I decided to use single binary. But as we can see, there is not very good way to deploy Loki Also for educational purposes, there a lot of headache with this mode, you can see, but I did these changes, so maybe it will fix the problem. Yeah, that's fix the problem because Loki is installing now and there is no problems here, I think. Pods. Yeah, Loki has been successfully deployed, but I think that there is no free nodes, yeah, and memory, so I need to add some nodes to my cluster. Promtail, okay, let's see. Oh, there is 401 code. So if notification enabled in our values, we should to pass organization ID or ID of our tenant Loki, but I have only one tenant, it's me, so I don't need to be enabled. C chunks can be deployed because arguments like memory 8 gigabytes and there is requests for memory like about 10 gigabytes. I don't have enough memory, so I think that I'll just disable this. There is already much nodes. I don't have enough money for all this. As we can see, Loki has been successfully installed, but there is a problem that ingress for Loki haven't been created yet. So it is because I made a mistake here. I make it like this instead of this, so it's my mistake. And also, as we can see, Grafana and Promtail are deployed. Promtail logs success to Loki, so we don't have any issues with notification. Let's check another cluster where our Promtail and Prometheus also deployed. So as we can see, I checked default values and I find out that I don't need directive Promtail for configuring these directives, so it's just my mistake, just made it like that. I don't need it. Now, as we can see, Promtail are configured correctly. There is no errors in logs, and Promtail successfully resolved Loki instance. So let's check in the first cluster. Pods, Promtail. Let's see some logs. Yeah, all good. Let's go to the grafana.metops. Paste login and password here. So I defined it early here. So let's check. We have built-in dashboards as I described it here. So, and let's check some. There is an empty dashboard because I didn't enable metrics in Ingress Nginx controller. So we can see Kubernetes overview. Yeah, that's fine. As you can see. Let's check Loki. So we can find some logs here from 2 clusters. Like for example, let's check pods in second cluster. Here we are here. So for example, pods Promtail 45M75 Promtail. Yes, that's it. And we have logs from second cluster, and also let's check logs from first cluster. For example, from Loki, okay, Loki on query. Oh, that's fine. So that's all.